There are a lot of mental health experts out there that'll give you their list of tips that they think will help. The problem is they're based on their perception of what is right and wrong. At University Elite, we do something different. We treat our patients using sound psychological, neurological, and physiological science. We know what works and what doesn't. We don't get confused with what's right versus wrong. While others continue to struggle with these tips that they've received, we help people gain the long-term happiness and well-being with our approach.
Welcome to the University Elite Podcast, where you learn the why behind human behavior and how to live a truly happy life. Now, your host is a combat-proven veteran, physician, master psychotherapist, diet expert, trauma authority, and someone who has everyday common sense, Dr. Hans Watson.
Well, hello everybody. Welcome again. Our next question comes to us from Tom. And Tom writes a question expressing his concern about the future with regards to how the world stage and the war in Ukraine is going, and to that. And Tom writes, Dr. Watson, I find myself worrying up late at night and wondering if World War III is about to start. I'm worried that Vladimir Putin is a psychopath and cannot be stopped. And I wonder, is this similar to when Neville Chamberlain failed to stand up against Hitler? It worries me to death. Can you please help me understand what is going on psychologically behind Vladimir Putin as well as the rest of the world? Okay, that's a very good question, Tom. Very astute looking at that. Now, for those that aren't World War II buffs, here's the history. In World War II, there was a group of people that said there is a person creating a lot of problems and they're starting to take over other places. They need to be stopped. We need to stand up and stop them. Otherwise, it's going to result in terrible things. Britain had a gentleman named Neville Chamberlain who said, it's not worth it. We don't want to get into a big war. And they failed to stand up against Hitler, who was invading a very small country just to the north of him. And what happened is that Hitler got a little confidence. And once he had a little confidence, he then began to execute his great, his proposed great invasion of all the different countries in an attempt to actually take over the world. And you saw World War II as a result, and hundreds of millions of people are estimated to have died thanks to that. And many people go back and say, had Neville Chamberlain, who was the leader of Britain at the time, stood up and said, we will not take this Hitler, the war could have ended and you know, tens of millions of lives may have been saved. But instead what happened was Hitler got a roll, and then it eventually came to England, and thus the Battle of Britain and the D-Day that everybody's familiar with. And so the thing that everybody says is, we'll never let that happen again. We'll never have a tyrant stand up again and not do it. And not take action, because we never want World War II to happen again. So that's what Tom is referring to. Now, as far as Tom's question, is Vladimir Putin a psychopath? And it worries him. Well, that should worry you if he were a true psychopath. Because a psychopath is defined by, if you look at the National Institute of Health produced a study where they did it on psychopathy, and inside there they gave the definition, and there were three main points to somebody that was a psychopath. So understanding these three main points is how you'll know if they're a psychopath. And the reason this matters is, if they're a psychopath, it does not matter logic or consequences or anything else. A simple way to say it is, they get happy off of seeing other people suffer. Whereas non-psychopaths, you can use logic and you can use certain things up to a certain point. Non-psychopaths, what happens if you spoil them too much, eventually they quit caring what anybody else thinks, because all they get to the point of is believing they deserve it because they've been enabled for so long. So let's take a moment and understand what those three things are that make somebody a psychopath, because if we can show Vladimir Putin is a psychopath, based on the evidence we have, clearly I haven't done an evaluation of him, then we would need to be worried very greatly. And if he's not a psychopath, then we realize there's things we can do, and we, if we're willing to do them, then it would be a matter of being able to curtail a situation like Hitler, where he tried taking over the world. So there are three main things. The first thing with psychopaths is they always have a lack of emotional response to situations. They really don't care what's going on, and they really don't have, some have theorized, they don't even have the capacity to generate the emotions that most of us would consider normal and experience. And so the second one is a lack of empathy, meaning I don't even understand and feel even a little bit of the pain I'm causing you. Most people, when we feel empathy, what we do is, if I cause somebody pain, or somebody I love is experiencing pain, I'll actually feel part of that myself, even though I'm not the one going through it directly. That's empathy. And then the third one is poor behavioral control. They just plain and simple cannot control their behavior. It is not something that they have the capacity to do at that time. And so the key with all this is, those three items, the no emotional response, lack of empathy, and lack of behavioral control, that happens in all regards, regardless who's there. A psychopath, it's regardless who they're. Oftentimes psychopaths are smart, but a true psychopath is not able to control it, regardless of who's around. And so that's what a psychopath is. Now, contrast that with somebody who's spoiled. And if we go to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, it says a person who is harmed in character, and this is how we harm them in character, by being treated too leniently or indulgently. And when we hear indulgently, what we need to think is rules apply except when they have a good enough reason there's an exception. And so continually providing excessive exceptions to the rule is what creates a spoiled individual. And then the problem there is the spoiled individuals will get to the point that they don't think any of the rules apply to them that they don't want. And so they start to believe they can pick and choose the rules that are going to apply, and therefore once you let them go too far, that becomes their reality. And so now it's not that they're different than a psychopath, because a spoiled person can be corrected eventually. But it's the longer you go, the harder it is and the more painful it is to get them to change. But they have an emotional response. In fact, spoiled people generally have large emotional responses. They have empathy. They will feel pain. They don't always care, but they still have that capacity. And then the poor behavioral control, well, that's shared between spoiled people and psychopaths. But then the other clear difference is where psychopaths would be somebody that it did not matter where they were going to have those same three things. Spoiled people, you'll watch them turn it on and turn it off depending on who's around. If the parent is around for a spoiled child that enforces the rules and does not provide a bunch of exceptions, they'll act good in front of that parent. But when the other parent is around, regardless of who else is around, the parent that enforces the rules in a healthy manner, if the other parent, the enabling parent is around, well, then that spoiled kid is going to throw a fit and do what they want because they know they have the protection of that enabling parent. And so as we look at this, that's important, because if they're spoiled, things can be done to change their behavior. If they're a psychopath, it's hopeless. And so before you go getting worried that there's no hope for improvement, let's go ahead and evaluate some of the evidence we have. And I'm here to tell you, if you look, Vladimir Putin has demonstrated he can have an emotional response. Even his propaganda videos demonstrate a level of emotionality. While it's still a lot of it just acting, it still is something he is able to experience. Whereas if you go to, and empathy, he's able to experience empathy. The difference is he chooses who he wants to experience empathy for. Oh, kind of like a spoiled person. And now, does he have poor behavioral control? Absolutely not. You watch him button it up and really get serious when he needs to. He can control his behavior. He's showing that he's a rugged man when he needs to. He's showing that he is a caring man when he needs to. This guy has control of his behaviors very well. And so we see that Vladimir Putin does not meet the criteria for somebody who is a psychopath. Now, he definitely meets the criteria for somebody who's spoiled. Here's the kicker though. All of our politicians meet this criteria. Look at politicians as a whole. We're going to see, and you'll also notice with Vladimir Putin, remember, I'm not here to tell you what's right and what's wrong. That is what, politicians will tell you what's right and wrong, religions and parents will tell you what's right and wrong. So if you want to know what's right or wrong in this situation with the behaviors I'm about to talk about, you need to either go to a religious organization, a political organization, or your family. And they can tell you what makes it right or wrong, because right or wrong changes based on your perspective. The political party's view of what is right and wrong is completely different. And the different religions have different viewpoints of that. And families definitely have different ones. I'm only here to share with you behaviorally and psychologically what's going on. And so as we look at this, Vladimir Putin has proven that he is only going to act this way when certain people with certain tendencies are in control. And if you look, it's actually the United States government, and largely President and Congress, who he follows. And when we enable him to act badly, he acts badly. And when we stop him from acting badly, or we say we're not going to put up with it, he actually behaves. And so we are seeing this, and so let me share with you what Vladimir Putin likely has been watching. And let me tell you, before we jump in there, both political parties have contributed to this. However, it's significant. Why did Vladimir Putin respond like he has with the party that's in power during both times? So let's look at some examples. Vladimir Putin is demonstrating that if he can find an excuse that's good enough, that certain people in power will not hold him accountable. They will provide an exception to the rule. And as he does this, he keeps taking bigger and bigger things, just like a spoiled child would. Spoiled child first starts saying, well, I'm gonna decide to go out with my friends even though I haven't done my work. And if we permit it, well, they'll quit doing their work. And then the spoiled child's going to go, well, if that rule didn't apply, I'm going to come home late because I found a really good excuse and there will be no consequence. So now they're not doing the work and they've started coming home late. And then they're going to say, well, there's a good reason that I want to. And soon the reality becomes, if I want to, just find a reason I can do it. I want to start using substances, even though that's maybe it's against the law because I'm not old enough, or if it's illegal drugs, or you can see how that gets to the point that eventually that child is going to stop listening to the parents, and hopefully you intervene before then. The sooner you stop it, the less spoiled the child is getting and the less pain it is to change that behavior. The older they get and the more entrenched, sometimes you can't stop that behavior. You go past that point of no return. So let's look at this. Vladimir Putin has shown if there's an excuse. Now, if you look at the history of Vladimir Putin, he has been indoctrinated in making Russia the greatest nation again. And that's what he lives for. There's a lot of evidence there that I believe that wholeheartedly. And so he wants to make Russia the great nation it was once again. He wants to go toe-to-toe with the U.S. And he doesn't care who he has to pair up with as long as Russia gets to be that great nation again. This is a former intelligence operative where the rules don't always apply to intelligence operatives. So he learned there, rules only apply in certain situations. I am an exception to the rule. I get to break rules. That's what a spy is. You're breaking the rules. And then we look at he was in war. Well, war oftentimes has exceptions to the rules. You're able to kill, whereas you're not in regular time, and that's considered an exception to the rule. And don't get into whether a war is right or wrong. Somebody else can do that. But that is a time where we've determined, in self-defense and war. And so you do this. So we look at this, and who has Vladimir Putin been watching? We really see him break onto the stage when President Obama was in power. And whether you like or dislike President Obama, I'm the type of guy who can find some positive and some negative in every one of these presidents. But one of the things that happened, you remember there was a red line that President Obama said, if chemical weapons are used, we will respond. And sure enough, in 2013 in Syria, chemical weapons were used. And what did President Obama do? Well, the world viewed it as virtually nothing. So now all of a sudden, what does Vladimir Putin say? You set a rule, but much like the parents of a spoiled child, you did not provide a consequence that makes it so painful that I'm willing to stop that behavior. Okay? So then what does Vladimir Putin do at that point? He invades part of Ukraine called Crimea, and he takes it over. And what did we do? We shook our finger and said, do not do that. This is really bad. And maybe even did some nominal sanction type stuff. But we let him keep Crimea. We essentially let him come home late from his, Vladimir Putin came home late from his curfew, and we did nothing about it. And we let him keep playing. And then he started looking and saying, okay, if the president's not going to hold me accountable, let me look at the Congress that is supposed to hold the president accountable. And so what have we seen? Well, here's the key. Who was in charge when all this was happening? It was a democratically led presidency and Congress. You go a step further. Who was the vice president during President Obama's turn? It was President Biden, at the time Vice President Biden. And so it's not a coincidence that during the Obama campaign and then the continuation of the Obama campaign, which many argue is President Biden and Vice President Harris, that he would see these are individuals who have not proven in the past to hold their boundaries and enforce consequences, and they make exceptions. And then he sees our Congress do the same thing. And so if, from a behavioral perspective, what is he watching? He watches Congress come out and say, if you riot, it's no longer a negative to riot as long as it's about a topic that you think is good enough. So you're willing to make an exception as long as it's something you deem as good enough. And so what do we see? The Black Lives Matter riots that happened earlier this year, those were seen as acceptable. Whereas the Capitol Hill riots, or the country's capital riots, those were seen as unacceptable. What did Vladimir Putin learn from that? If I have a good excuse, you'll excuse it. Instead of us saying, riots are unacceptable regardless of who it is or your reason. We do not accept riots. That would have been the thing that stops a spoiled child from taking advantage and trying the next step. Well, what did he see? We did not do that. We said, it's okay if it's about the Black Lives Matter riot, and I'm not here to argue for or against Black Lives Matter. I'm just here to say that behavior had consequences on the world stage. Or let's do it the other one. We say, it is always negative to judge somebody or give a privilege based on race. This is unjust. We even call it systematic racism. Well, what did we see? We saw Vice President that President Biden picked was based on race. Many argue it was on race. So instead of picking the most qualified individual, you picked one based on race. So now suddenly it's not, behaviorally, it's not a negative to discriminate based on race, because this is the one that I choose. This is the demographic that I am saying it's okay with this demographic. But another demographic, you can't. See how, no, I'm not saying right or wrong, but do you see how a guy like Vladimir Putin says, they're not holding their boundaries. They're not enforcing what they say. Or the Supreme Court nomination that President Biden just used. It's okay that I'm choosing it based on gender and race, not based on criteria that have nothing to do with genetic or congenital. So now all of a sudden he's seeing them say, it's okay to discriminate and put one group ahead of another based on race if it's the race I choose. That is behaviorally very, very dangerous because you're telling people it's okay. Psychopaths, it wouldn't matter. Spoiled kids, this is hugely enabling. Okay, let's look at this. Now, if we say this is something that's not allowed to go past, and we say this is a law, this is a rule that you cannot break, what has he seen? He watched the U.S. do investigations, and he watched Hillary Clinton's server she used when she was in government office, which many people have come out and showed this was against the law. And what happened to Hillary Clinton with an investigation? Many have argued it's swept under the rug. Whether that's true or not, Putin was watching. And then, what do we see when it's President Trump and the business dealings? Suddenly, this one matters, and we'll do FBI investigations, and we'll have New York City and their government established do investigations. And what is he watching? He's saying, okay, so you're still not strictly enforcing the rules you say you are. I can get away with things. You're not a rule keeper. This is behaviorally what's happening. And so it goes a step farther. Then he says, okay, let's watch foreign influence in elections. First, it says, hey, we want to impeach Trump because of his foreign influence elections. So they do it based on this Steele dossier and these other things. Turns out that was financed by Hillary Clinton's campaign. Did they hold her to the same level of accountability as they did President Trump? The appearance is no. I can't say yes or no because I'm not in the FBI. The appearance is no. So what is Vladimir Putin learning? Hey, that rule is not being kept. Or you want to do it, they're talking about, did President Trump influence people in Ukraine in order to get gain and push his policy? And that happened. The House impeached him for that. What do we see? The House is going to impeach him. We're going to enforce this rule. And then they discover evidence of Hunter Biden on this laptop doing exactly that. And his father, the president, Joe Biden, and the vice president before had a huge part in that. And what do we see? We see, hey, whoa, no news here. This, right or wrong, is not what I'm talking about. But this behavior teaches Vladimir Putin he can break the rules and nobody's going to do it. So, you look, and there's one more example. We look at this insider trading, and we say, it is not fair for people to do insider trading, to have knowledge that has to come to the government based on, is this company hitting hard times where their stock's going to drop, and you can't use that information to sell before the drop happens. But then people say, okay, let's enforce this rule because the people who have access to it, like Congress, you shouldn't be allowed, you and your spouses should not be allowed to trade stocks in any companies because you have insider information. And so what do? Then we see Speaker of the House Pelosi stall a proposed law that says, hey, you're not allowed to trade stocks. You and your family aren't allowed to trade stocks. You have to invest in what they call blind trust, meaning somebody you don't talk to manages your money in a trust that it's blind to you. And they do it without that insider information. Isn't it a coincidence? She stopped that from happening, that law from coming to a vote. And now, what does Vladimir Putin see? Those rules don't apply. Everybody else, you'll go to jail. Martha Stewart went to jail for insider trading. Big bad Martha Stewart. But Nancy Pelosi and the other people in Congress, Chuck Schumer, you don't see them bringing up saying, wait a minute, let's police our own here. Vladimir Putin watches that. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. So, why Vladimir Putin is acting now matters. And it's because we are currently showing, and let me be really clear, the Republicans are just as guilty. You look at this, it's funny. We look at it, and one of the things Vladimir Putin knows about us is, we look at when Mitt Romney was running against President Obama. They asked him, who is our biggest geopolitical foe? And Mitt Romney said, without a doubt, it's Russia. And President Obama, naively, exactly like Neville Chamberlain did, and in fact, many people laughed him out of the House, and wouldn't you know, one of the people they ridiculed, think about it, it was the Prime Minister who then led England through World War II and is considered one of the greatest. So, isn't it funny? They made fun of the guy who predicted this would happen and later came back to him and said, help us, exactly what you said is happening. I'll let you look into that and you see that. But he definitely was a great man. And so as we do this, President Obama said, hey, the 80s want their foreign policy back to Mitt Romney. And they made fun of him and the mainstream media made fun of him. Turns out he was right. And he was looking at it. What did Vladimir Putin learn from this? He learned that I can do what I want when President Obama or his people are in power. And he's proven that through his actions. I'm not so sure when other people are in power. And so he did some testing. He tested the rules while President Trump was in power, but he never made this. Why did he take over Crimea during President Obama's time? Why did he take over and invade Ukraine during President Biden's time? I don't have the answers to that, but what I can tell you is he feels like he could get away with, or he wouldn't do it. Vladimir Putin is a very, very shrewd individual. And so as we do this, we realize if we intervene soon enough, then we can do that. How can we intervene as people? Do not let your mental health fail because you're seeing this. Instead, what this means is we can hold Vladimir Putin accountable by holding our own elected representatives accountable. We can call our elected representatives and say, I want you to support that referendum that says if you're investing in stocks, you must do it through a blind trust. You don't get to cheat anymore. If you are doing this, I want you to have equal investigations into anybody who riots. I want you to investigate on civil rights anybody who is given a position based on race, gender, sexual orientation, or any of these. None of those should be okay to be used for or against anybody. And if you do that, then that shows, hey, here are the rules. They matter to us. And if there's an exception, tell us why the exception is there and give it to us. Just be honest. You don't get to pretend like it doesn't exist. If you do that, you'll see that we have to change out a bunch of our politicians, but it will also put a stop to these spoiled international actors that are in our country and others, and it will make it so that you don't have to worry. This is one of the things that happens. Now, as we say that, don't let your heart be troubled. Because if this happens and Vladimir Putin can't be stopped, well, it's already too late. You can't do anything about it. I don't believe it's too late. But what I do believe is, like many spoiled children, he's then going to say to the parent who is a capitulator, a parent who is an enabler, well, okay, I'll come back and play with some of the rules, but here's the things I want you to give me. And so he's likely to get, okay, well, I will give you a new phone, sweetheart, if you'll stop using marijuana. Okay, here's your new phone, and they'll at least stop for a little while. And so when we look at Vladimir Putin, he can be influenced. He's not a psychopath. He has not demonstrated that. Instead, he's demonstrated he will get away with what he can. But as soon as we lay down the law and he realizes the parent is in the room that is not going to put up with and give exceptions to the rules, he will actually back down, is my prediction based on the behaviors there. So you don't have to be worried that he's going to start World War III based on his current behaviors. Now, can he get desperate and lash out? Sure, and I hope that doesn't happen, but that's why I would not, Tom, I would tell you, I would not write it in and go into the bunker yet. Instead, I would try to say, am I in my life making sure I give healthy enforcements of boundaries and rules that I need to? Am I living the rules? If you do that, you're going to be happy. So that's kind of a deep political one, but that is the behavior we see there. And so if you have more questions, keep them coming at universityelite.com, where we answer your questions and we'll pick them. And hopefully that helps you to calm your fears about President Putin, and we can just hold him a little more accountable by holding our elected officials accountable, and it will work. So, all right, we'll catch you on the next one. Until then, you guys be good.